Welcome back to A Bit of Curiosity. As always, I'm your host, Jeremy Howlett. I've got here Brad Brockbank. I'm stoked to have Brad on. Brad's an adoring husband, father of four, lover of life. His pursuit of happiness is rooted in creating a life of liberty and freedom for his family. He works as a professional life coach, coaching executives and high performers, running his coaching business called U of U. That's YOU. He's spent the past 12 plus years doing this. And welcome, Brad. It's so
Thank
good to
you.
have you on.
I'm excited to be on here. I love getting to hang out with you and just as we've got to know each other. I'm excited about this today.
Yeah, it's great. We met a couple weeks ago. I guess it's probably been 3 or 4 weeks now at a networking event that a mutual friend invited me to, and we had a chance to kind of chat for a few moments there, but then connected, grabbed lunch, and have had several conversations since then. So it's great to connect. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, my man.
Here we love diving into curiosities, who we are, where we're going, how we can improve. And so as we lean into that, what applicable things can we do as individuals to better lean into our greatness without becoming overwhelmed with like perfectionism?
Man, the perfectionism piece is especially when you're dealing with the high performing executives. Perfectionism is such a difficult category for a lot of them because they they've been driving and pushing and what I find, so I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, but you do this long enough, you start to pick up on a couple of things. And what I've found is a lot of them, their parents drove them for excellence in it was almost perfectionism. They aimed at perfection. And I think many of them along the way, these parents forgot to say, hey, I'm proud of you for trying. And it's the try that we need to be rewarding ourselves for and proud of, especially high performers, because we just want to go, 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 go. And if we don't stop and say, hey, I put in my best effort, I gave it the best I could today, we end up hating ourselves because it wasn't perfect. And when is our effort ever perfect? When do our results ever come out perfect? Like never, right? So yeah, perfectionism, I've just been really tuned in with my own personal clients that's one of the main things that we need to help them get through and get over that hurdle.
So how do we strive then as high performers amidst like because there's this balance, right? Like because I think sometimes don't we try too hard
Oh yeah.
versus like okay, sometimes I just need to let it go and and just be instead of just trying to knock off a big long list of
No,
to-dos to
absolutely. This comes in a lot of like content creators and things that, we're always trying to put things out and put good into the world. And one of my mentors, her name was Kelly Roach, and she was a cheerleader for the NFL. She left the NFL and then became this entrepreneur and did really well and then became this coach, teaching people how to have success online. And she would say over and over and over during the year that I worked with her, done is better than perfect. And it's kind of that ideology of, let's just say, for instance, a podcast. I think this gets me often, especially in the podcast category, where I want it to be done well enough that I've got this like standard, this unwritten standard somewhere that ends up stopping me from just putting it out there, where I could literally just record it. Who cares if the intro's good? Who cares if I hesitated or stumbled over my words on a certain spot, or if I said or like forget all of that and just get it out there, because the content itself is really, really good and high quality. So done is better than perfect. And I think in these, as we look at the bit of curiosity, just try that. Just try getting something posted and force yourself not to dig in all the little nuances and is it good enough or are they going to criticize me. Get it out there and then seek for feedback. And I'll bet you 95% of the time people are going to be like, dude, you crushed it. I'd say almost 100% of the time people are much more forgiving than we are to ourselves.
no, absolutely. We are our greatest critic, right? Like
Yeah.
we are the ones that are criticized the most by ourselves.
Yeah.
And whether that's from childhood or whatever, like however that comes, right? Like, but yeah, I love the concept of done is better than perfect. And that's something that I've been working a lot towards in my own personal journey, right? Like, because I do, like, I want things to be perfect, right? Like the photo I take, the composition, what I write, right? Like what I'm pushing out there, like it's got to look the best, right? And I'm comparing myself to individuals that have 50,000 hours of practice in something that, like, and if I can't be as good as them, I don't feel like it's worthy to go and put it out there, right? And this, so there is this like comparison, right, as the thief of joy and just kind of that vibe, right? I had an epiphany. This was probably a week or two ago. I've made it my personal purpose, and I feel like part of who I am is an individual to unleash courage. And a lot of that starts with myself. And then also in helping others to unleash courage, right? And I had this thought or this epiphany, this moment come to me that like discouragement is the opposite of courage, right? Like this is an antithesis, right? Like it negates what comes after it. But I've never thought like, okay, like discouragement is the exact opposite of courage, right? Like when we're discouraged in something, I'm discouraged in what I'm putting forth. I'm discouraged in what I've created. I'm discouraged, like I'm lacking courage. I don't want to put it in front of the world. I don't feel like I have the motivation, the energy, the courage, the ability to do that thing. And
Yeah.
what are ways that we can overcome that discouragement and lean more into that courage?
Well, I love the mental image that kind of paints, because we always think of discouragement as sadness, right? Like I'm sad, I feel discouraged. But that little shift, that epiphany you had, that's deep insight right there. So being able to turn to the courage and say, okay, am I, your listeners right now, I want them to think for a second, am I discouraged? Am I feeling that way? Do I feel like my hope has faded? And if that's the case, it's not sadness. It's like you say, I've lost my courage. And most men, most of us, when we look at it in that light, we start to change our mindset and go, well, I'm not a weak and feeble-minded individual. Maybe I'm down just a little bit, but I'm going to find my courage. I want to find the drive. And then it comes to the question of what do I do with that courage, right? Well, whatever it is that you're afraid of, because when we're standing in our comfort zone, that's when our courage is lacking, because you're afraid to do something. You're afraid of somebody might criticize you. Somebody might think ill of you because you took the courage to stand up and put something out there that's risky. And so we shrink. We get pulled back from our original intent. When you think about your new idea, well, an idea that might have been new at one point, you were so excited. You were ready to go crush the world. This is going to change everything. I'm going to be so successful with it. And then it gets hard, right? Then you hit reality, the barriers to entry, all the difficulties that come with trying to start something new. And that's where discouragement starts to creep in. And it's funny that you bring up the word discouragement. I have a wedge. So are you familiar do you know what a Feller's wedge is?
That's the wedge that you use when you're pounding into like a wood to split wood, right? Like,
So that's a splitting wedge, and
okay, then
it's
no.
an important distinction. Actually, an important distinction of a splitter's wedge. A splitter's wedge is very angled. You got it, this like deep, heavy angle. A Feller's wedge, on the other hand, is very narrow in its angle, because a Feller's wedge is what they use when they're chopping down a tree and they need to push the tree over. But when you've got a huge like sequoia or a pine, like these giant evergreen trees, you can't just hammer a splitting wedge in there and it's going to push over. You've got to use something that's it's like a sliver. It just works its way gently in, but because it's made of steel, it slowly starts to push that tree, and you keep adding them until that tree falls over in the direction that you want. So this Feller's wedge, my wife had it engraved. It's an old Feller's wedge, probably from the 1800s. And it says on it, discouragement. And it's a really interesting piece sitting in my office. And what it is about, it actually, there's a poem that talks about Satan having all of his implements on cell. And he had all these bright, shiny chrome, whiz bang instruments and malice and hate and anger and all these different implements. And they were all listed for a price. And in the corner was this innocent looking wedge shaped tool that was beaten down. It was rusted. It was very dilapidated compared to all the other tools. But the price was 20 times the next highest tool. It was higher price than all of the tools combined. And one of the demons that was sorting through and shopping through all of these implements of evil saw the wedge-shaped tool and said, "This one's lame. Why is it so much more expensive?" And the devil said, "Well, with that tool, when I can't get near a man with addiction or anger or any other tool in my toolbox, that tool, discouragement, that's the one that I can slowly open them up at the crest of their head, and they hardly know it's me. Once I've gotten them open, I can work all the other works inside of them." And then it goes on to say, like, the devil never sold it, and it's still his, and whatever. Kind of a cool story.
That's a fascinating visual, right? Like, and I think that kind of builds off the very first question I asked, right? Like, like perfectionism, right? Like, if we're not perfect, if we're not creating the best, or we're not better than everybody else, we get discouraged, right? I think a lot of times, like, well, I started a business, right? Like, I launched a footwear company, and one of the biggest things that I think was an avenue to our success was we had a unique selling proposition. And so, but like, a lot of times I think I go into the world, right, with this imposter syndrome, not necessarily feeling that I have a unique selling proposition of myself, my skill set, right? Like, and I think a lot of us feel that way, right? Like, it's like, okay, what can I want to be a photographer, but my photos are not as good as these 10 other people. I want to be a writer, but how can I write like Hemingway, right? Or Steinbeck, or what, right? Like, I want to be a movie producer, but there's no way I could be like George Lucas, or like, and we start to compare ourselves to all of these others, right? And I think, and that's that discouragement, right? Like, it's like, okay, now if I can't be that, then I'm gonna give up, right? Like, I love the story of Steve Jobs. Like, Steve Jobs was run out of his own company, right? Like, he was let
Right.
go from Apple, and he could have just been discouraged and given up and said, okay, you know what? I got plenty of money. I'm good. I'm just going to go be a hippie. He was a hippie already, but whatever. But I'm just going to go buy an island and disappear, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't his MO, right? Like, he could not do that. And so he started Next, he got into Pixar, right? Like, and he evolved to the point where it was like Apple ended up buying his company, bringing him back and said, okay, now we've seen what you do. Like, the board says, okay, we need you to run this because we're not doing well. And he could have easily been discouraged. He could have easily he had plenty of money to just go disappear and say, you know what, I'm done. But instead, he put his nose to the grindstone. He fought. He created some imperfect things. He failed a lot, right? Like, he had a lot of missteps along the way, but he learned how to lead a company again. And eventually, well, the rest is history, right? Like, go grab his biography and read the rest of the story, right? But what a powerful example that is of like like courage, right? Like, that takes a lot of courage to go and do it over again. A lot of people ask me, would I ever go start a shoe company again? And my immediate answer is no. It was a lot of work. But as I think about, right, like, am I discouraged to do it? Am I lacking courage? Like, maybe, right? Like, I don't know, right? Like, there's there's a lot that can go into that. And so, yeah, I think that's such a fascinating like example, right? Like, as we look at, okay, if none of these other temptations, other things are working, I can use this one, right? Like, let's go take discouragement and we can ultimately bring somebody down through that.
And you don't think of it as evil, right? You wouldn't think of it as like the devil's tool. It's just, but then when you actually step back and think about what it does to you, it's absolutely, and that's why it's such a subtle, and that's why the distinction between the Feller's wedge versus the splitting wedge. The splitting
Yeah.
wedge, it's like, straight up, you can tell when something, you look at the effects of drugs on people, and it's like, okay, well, acid probably is a bad idea. That's one of the devil's tools. It ruins people's lives. That's an easy one to say no to. But then you start thinking about discouragement, and it's like, well, I mean, we all get discouraged sometimes, but it's when we sit in it. It's when
Yeah.
we lose the courage and we decide, I'm not going to play the game anymore. I'm out. I'm too afraid. That's when all of a sudden we start losing our ground and giving space for those other tools to take place in our lives.
So that's, yeah, I love, so good, right? Like, you talk a lot about creating new neural pathways in the brain. And I think overcoming discouragement, right? Like leaning into our courage, it takes some action, right? Like it takes a lot of action. And it's not easy. But I think it does take sometimes a rewiring of our mindset, rewiring of who we are. And so how do we create those new neural pathways so that we can achieve what we want, so that we can lean into, so that we can, and I choose the words carefully, right? Like for me it's unleash courage. And the reason I use the word unleash versus unlock or acquire or what is, I believe that courage is innate within all of us. I think it's sitting there, right? There's just a lot of things that are holding it back. Like if you picture what Sandlot, right? Like you think about Sandlot, you've got the big giant dog, right, in the backyard, and he's just being held back, right? Like this
Beast.
ferocious
Oh,
beast,
yeah.
right? Like, and he's just being held back. As soon as that fence goes down, we're all dead, right? Like,
That's it.
but that's what I picture is inside of each of us, right? Like it's all in us, and it's leashed, it's held back, and so we've got to unleash it and let it go, right? Like let's let courage go, and that's hard to do. It's not easy, but I think it does come down to that rewiring, right? So how do we create those new neural pathways so that we can achieve what we want, so that we can unleash courage in our lives?
Okay, well, now you've unleashed my beast. This is where I start to geek out. So I'll apologize and warn the listeners that we're about to go into some science content.
That's what we
So,
want. Let's go.
all right. So in the brain, we have this area called the reticular activating system. Many of you might have heard of it. It's in a couple of popular books. But the best way to understand the reticular activating system is it's this. It's kind of like the bouncer at the club. Its job is to keep things out that aren't supposed to be in there. And the reticular, well, one of its main jobs. So the reticular activating system, the best way to recognize in your own life when it has been active is if you've ever been driving your car and you pull into your driveway at home and you go, whoa, how did I get here? Like, I don't even remember the drive. It's the reticular activating system. The reason that you don't remember the drive is because as a filter, the reticular activating system takes information that we have actively coming into our senses, whether it's visual, auditory, whether it's the sense of touch, taste, smell, whatever. It says, I know what that is. It's okay. Think about when you walk into a room and somebody's been cooking like with garlic and it's really strong when you first walk in, but you stand there for a couple minutes and you don't smell the garlic anymore. The reticular activating system has normalized and said, hey, we don't need to be alert about that thing anymore. I've already processed it. I know what it is. Yes, I'm still picking up the garlic smell, but we don't need attention to it. So you don't smell the garlic any longer. Likewise, when we drive, you're going through this routine, this directional path that you've gone 1,000 times, and your brain just normalizes. It doesn't even, you're thinking about work, you're thinking about all the other things you have to do. Those are what are getting the attention, because everything else, nothing of consequence happened that your brain needed to call attention to. So the reticular activating filters out. But where this is important in creating neural pathways and new ideas, the neural pathway If you think about these neural connections in our brain from A to B, you have these responses that come up in your life. When something happens, somebody says something, there's a trigger, there's a neural pathway that exists that your brain will automatically take because it's a highway. It's not a back road, it's a highway. But when we start saying, you know what, I don't like the way that I react in this situation. I don't like being discouraged over and over and over every time I get that trigger. I need to start a new pathway. Well, guess what? You're just starting you're driving through the field. So barely starting to knock the grass over. There's hardly a road to speak of. And it's hard to find that road next time and the next time. But if you do keep driving it, eventually it starts to carve out the path, right? The same thing happens in our brain. The more we actively choose to do something or react in a certain way or to speak in a new direction, it's like your New Year's resolutions, right? This podcast will probably drop right close to the new year. So with the New Year's resolutions coming up, you say, oh, I want to start going to the gym. Well, how hard is it to go to the gym when you haven't been going to the gym? At first, we're excited, I can do it. But then about week 2 or 3, something comes up. You're exhausted. You've been pushing this. And you think, I'm going to just miss one time. And then
So that's the time to change is right now, because this will probably drop 2 or 3 weeks into the new year. So
there you go.
so
Okay.
now reassess, right? Like get back.
Yep. It's right the exact time that it's going to get hard. This is just like hey, I'm starting a new company. I'm so excited. I'm going to make $1 million. And suddenly you realize not everybody's into this thing like I was. Okay, this is hard. That's the moment that you have to say, I'm going to build this new neural connection, this new neural pathway. And so you keep pushing. And that reticular activating system, you think about how we form habits and things like that. The problem with the reticular activating system in this process of forming a new habit, forming a new courage, forming a new whatever it might be, the reticular activating system says, that's not us. I've looked at the file. That's not normal. So it tries to push you back to normal. And it's a filter. It's like that. Like I said, it's the bouncer at the club saying, you don't belong here. And it tries to kick you out. But in that consistency, all of a sudden you start becoming familiar with that thing that you're choosing to do. And if you push through a couple of times through the hard moments where you do want to quit, where you are going to fall away, where there's reasons and good excuses, you all of a sudden start to become more courageous in what we're talking about, or in the terms of the reticular activating system. I always assimilate it to like a librarian. And the librarian or the secretary goes and looks in this file and it says, let's say that you're trying to convince yourself that you're a millionaire and you're trying to use affirmations. So you say, I'm a millionaire, and you say it with feeling and all the things that the secret or whoever your guru that you're listening to says you're supposed to do it. And you're like, I'm so excited about it. And you do it. And then this reticular activating system, little secretary goes through the file and it says, okay, file on you're a millionaire. And it opens up the file and it's like, this is empty. That's not true. And you feel that in your brain, like argue with you, right? No, you're not. I am a millionaire. No, you're not. I'm a millionaire. No, you're not. Right? And so we get this back and forth ping pong. But as you continue to work at that, as you push through and say it over and over, suddenly one day the reticular activating system goes and looks in the file. And even though it doesn't have a file of, hey, you have $1 million in your bank account, it has this little file, this little thing in the file there that says, this is somewhat familiar to me. Adjust. And suddenly it lets a little bit through. And you keep going and you keep affirming and you keep looking for evidence that gets put into that little file. And eventually it says, our reactions, our mindset, our way that we're reacting to the world is not in alignment with what I'm finding in this file. And it changes. It changes you. suddenly your subconscious takes note and starts to react, to talk, to respond differently than you used to when it knew you were not a millionaire. Now, maybe you're not a millionaire yet, but now you've made the change to start doing things differently that will lead you to become a millionaire. That's the power of new neural pathways. That's what the reticular activating system, why it can be our friend, but it's our enemy at the beginning of trying to become who we want to become.
I like that. And one of the things, like you talk about driving, right? Like if we're driving from point A to point B that we've done 1,000 times, it's rote, right? It's routine. But if we're going somewhere else, it's not, right? Like we have to map it out. And that, but first we need to know where we're headed, right? Like, and this comes to desire. This comes to what do I actually want, right? So what would you say is the best course to determine our desires? Because you use the example of I am a millionaire, right? Like, and to me, okay, that's an easy desire, right? But like for a lot of people, that may not carry enough weight. That may not carry enough emotion, right? Like being a millionaire, okay, nice, right? Like it's an arbitrary number that I pulled out of the sky, right? Like it's like, okay. And now I tell myself I am a millionaire, but when things get hard, right? Like on one of your previous podcasts, I think it was your coaching call, you talked about like, okay, we go and dig the canal, but the river returns to the river, right? Like, so when things get hard and the floods massively come, they're not going to necessarily follow the little canal that we dug out, right? They're going to go return back to the river. So the canal needs to be something bigger, broader, extensive with emotion and conviction. And I am a millionaire may not be enough conviction. So what is the best course to determine our desires?
Yeah, I think that that's really important. And in determining your own desires, I love the exercise that, if you take a paper, you sit down and you write out, if you knew you weren't going to fail, if you had all the resources, time, energy, what would you really want to do? What would you want your life to look like? And I just actually sat down the other day to do this exercise again. And I will tell you, even after doing this for the last 2 decades, it's still really hard to identify what you really truly want. And part of that's because of like morals and stuff. Like you're like, well, is the love of money, isn't that the root of all evil? I should maybe I shouldn't love money or desire it. I love what Zig Ziglar, he was a mentor of mine actually back when I was in my early 20s. I used to travel the road with him. And one of the things he would say is money is, it's not everything, but it's second only to water and air. So there is a need and a necessity to have a certain level of living for money. So I don't think the pursuit of it is bad. But identifying, are you cutting yourself out or saying like, maybe I shouldn't do this, maybe I shouldn't desire this because of, fill in the blank of whatever moral story you might have in the back of your mind. And it's okay to have those morals. It's okay to be guided by those morals such that they are not stopping you from doing like certain things like attaining wealth. I think that wealth is something that we should be pursuing because we know that if we have more wealth, more success, typically wealth is an enhancer. It's a magnifier. So it'll only make you more of whatever you are. So hopefully everyone listening to this podcast is a great person and it's going to magnify their morals of, for me, my wealth has allowed me to be more philanthropic, to reach out to more people, to help others find success and do ultimately what I love, which is coaching. So I think that in finding what is it that you desire, the trick is pulling down all the walls and the coulda, shoulda, woulda of life and saying, what would I do if I knew I wasn't going to be judged and I wasn't going to fail?
No, I think those are great questions for us to ask ourselves. And so if we haven't planned out what 2025 looks like, if we haven't visualized it yet, take time, sit down, ask these questions, right? Because I think at the forefront, right, like it's determining what are our desires, right? Like if I'm going to change my neural pathways, if I'm going to adjust my mindset, if I'm going to drive to success, first I need to define what is success, right? Because success is very different for all of us.
Every single
Like
one.
some of the individuals you coach, right? Like success may have been in the past, I want to build a $1 billion business. But success now might be I actually want to know who my kids are, or
Absolutely.
I want a better relationship with my spouse. Or so defining success is crucial to adjusting our mindset. Because again, back to the example of driving the car, if I'm just going home and I've driven it many times, I can just get in and I can just kind of let the car take me, right? Like let my habits take me to where, right? Because I'm used to it. It's comfortable. I've been there. I've done it. But then if I'm going to travel, if I'm going to get in the car and I'm going to go drive to Memphis, Tennessee, then it's going to be a little uncomfortable. I'm going to drive through different highways. I'm going to take different roads. I'm going to find different gas stations. I've got to do things differently, but I've got to determine my destination. I can just get on the road and just drive and see where it takes me. That's one adventure.
Yes.
Sometimes that can be a fun adventure. But at the end of the day, where do I want to end up, right? Like what do I want? And so it's determining our desires. It's coming up with those. And so I think it comes back, right? Habit 2 and 7 habits of highly effective people, right? Begin with the end in mind. And what does that mean to you, Brad? Begin with the end in mind.
Another quote Zig used to always say, he'd say, if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. And I think that we have to have definition of what we are aiming at, who we want to be, where we want to go. And like I said before, I just sat down to do this again and I found it to be a very difficult uh, exercise. The most common answer I get when I say, well, what are your goals? Can you take a wild guess on what might be the most common answer?
Make a lot of money.
It's actually not. I wish it was. It's a shoulder shrug. And the answer, I don't know.
I don't know. Fair. Yeah, I can see that.
I don't know. And again, going back to that quote, if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. You're going to end up stuck in the mud. That's where discouragement lives, is in the lack of goals, in the lack of what are we going to do? There's I can't remember who said this, but it says that if you have a strong enough why, you can overcome any how. And when you have a why, you have a reason to succeed. For me, while money is a goal, the reason that I want the money is for my family and for the ability to be able to bless other lives. And I know that money can be a tool, an instrument in my hands to be able to help do that. So it's not because I want to be rich. And do I want to drive cool cars? Do I want to have a Learjet someday? Sure. I hope that in owning those things that I will be able to use them to bless other people, to show them a lifestyle that they could also attain if they will use these principles, if they will dig in and be willing to pay the price. Because success at any cost never comes without a price. You guys building the shoe company, it was not an easy endeavor. How many days of sleepless nights, staying up, working your butt off to try to build that thing were there because that was the cost of success. And if there wasn't a cost of success, everybody would have it, right? We'd all be successful, everybody be happy. We'd never get discouraged and feel that pullback or pushback that life sometimes offers us to see if we're serious. Recently, I was talking with somebody and I said, the road to success is paved by the failures of those who reside there. And when you think about that, your failures are leading you to success. But too often we look at a failure and we feel like that's a stopping point. It's not. If we will push through, you will find that the failure is actually guiding the path and helping you to be stronger, to be more able to arrive at the destination of success. The Failfest that is getting launched, they're having their first Failfest coming up here soon. It's all about that. It's bringing together these successful founders and talking about how they've failed their way to success. So I love that concept of embracing our failures, and rather than looking back at them with disdain, looking back at them with an curious eye, saying, how did that help me grow? What did that bring for me? That's the way you find success, is a willingness to do that.
Yeah, I like the responding to failure, right? Like too often we look at failure as it's a stopping point, right? Like and I've heard it often said, and James Lawrence, who's been on this podcast, talks about it, the Iron Cowboy, but the concept of failure, you only fail if you don't overcome it, right? Like if that becomes your stopping point, that is the failure, right?
That's
The
right.
what we term as failure, right? Like, okay, I didn't do this perfectly, or I didn't, or I made a bad deal here, or I had to close down this company, or this sale didn't go well, or I had a bad customer service experience from my company. Whatever it is, right? Like those are, yeah, they're learning points. They can be considered failures, but they're only failures if they let it crumble or ruin you and you stop and you give up, right? Like we so in 2015, we took our kids on a road trip. We've done road trips throughout the state of Utah, California, right? Like, okay, that's one thing, right? But we drove to New York City from Utah. And our plan was to go all the way to Boston, right? We were going to hit some of the big key places. We were going to hit DC, New York, Boston, right? Like we were going to go to visit all of these awesome places. And so we had a destination, right? Like we knew, okay, these are the places we're going to hit. These are some of the places we're going to see. The dad's seen them when going to races and all of events and stuff. So we're going to go experience these cool places. Well, as we were in DC, we were spending a few days there. We had a great time, saw the nation's capital, right? Like it was awesome. And then on the way from DC up towards through Philadelphia and up towards New York, our kids were like, "Dad, we really want to go to Mall of America." And that's in Minneapolis, right? We had no plans to go to Minneapolis. And so we looked at the calendar, we looked at, okay, we've got this much time left. And so we made a shift, right? We decided, okay, we'll go spend the time in New York that we were going to spend, but we're not going to go up to Boston. We're going to cancel that part of the trip, and then we'll divert those efforts over to Twin Cities, right? So on our way home, we'll have time to hit Twin Cities, and then we'll also be able to get by Mount Rushmore, and we'll go do these. And did that ruin our trip? No.
Probably not.
Did we not see everything we went out to see? Yeah, like we missed Boston, but did we see other stuff? Absolutely. Like we got to go to Twin Cities, we got to see Mount Rushmore, we got to eat cheese in Wisconsin. Like we got to do some different things that we didn't otherwise plan to do. We had our end in mind. We had our map, we had our course drawn out, but we shifted. And that's okay, right? Like, and I think as we set our desires, as we determine success, and as we push towards success, because whatever I come up with success, this January 2025, I've determined this is success for 2025. Well, I may hit February and I'm not on track to lose the weight that I'm planning to lose. Or I may hit May and my business is just not performing like it needs to. Or I've run into this roadblock or I've hit this hurdle, right? Like, okay, now what, right? Like, do I just scrap it, right? Like, we could have said if our kids were like, we don't want to go to Boston, we could have been like, okay, screw it, let's just go home now, right? Like, let's
Call
just
it.
cancel this whole thing. This trip is worthless, right? But it wasn't, right? Like, no, that's crazy, right? Like, we're already in the East Coast. Like, we're not gonna cancel the whole trip and just go home. But sometimes we do that in life, right? Like, we make it to the East Coast from Utah, and we get there, and we're just like, everything's against us. The plan has to change. Forget it. I'm done. I give up, right? And I call this patient persistence. And I think it's so important in whatever we're pursuing that we're patiently persistent. If you want to lose 25 pounds this year, Like, you're not going to lose 25 pounds in a month. Yeah, maybe you can go get the Ozempic, whatever, the shots and whatever, like that might help, right? But you're going to have to change your diet. If you want to sustain this, you're going to have to change your diet, change your workout routines, make some serious life altering adjustments to shifting your habits, right? Like, I love the story that James Clear talks about in Atomic Habits regarding the British cycling team. The British cycling team for decades was horrible. They'd
Bottom of the world.
they'd go to the Tour de France and get smoked every year, right? Like they were horrible. And the coach comes in, he says, "Okay, we got to make some changes." And everybody's like on the edge of their seats. What are we gonna do? Are we gonna start? Is there some new nutrition regimen? Are we gonna get some new technology? Like what's gonna happen? What's the big shift, right? And he says, "Okay, here's what we need to do. We need to be 1% better every day." And as I tell that story, right, like I think to Naaman in the Old Testament, right? Like Naaman's got leprosy. He's a great leader of armies. He's got all of these authority, all this authority, all of these people that look to him, right? And he's struggling with this. And so his little servant gal is like, "Hey, you know what? There's a prophet in Israel that can help take away your leprosy." For one, like, okay, that's a lot of faith to like believe your little Israelite servant, right? Like, okay, like, really? Like, okay, I'll go test this theory, right? And so Naaman travels to Elijah, right? And he goes and he's like, okay, this prophet's gonna help me, he's gonna heal me, right? Like, this is like, I'm gonna get back to where I need to be. And so he goes to visit this prophet, right? And the prophet doesn't come out. He sends a little servant. So again, here we have a servant, right? Like, okay, now we're going to test your fortitude, Naaman, right? Like, let's see if you really are willing to get healed. So he sends out a servant, and the servant comes and says, "Okay, what you need to do is you need to go to the river Jordan and you need to wash 7 times, and then you'll be healed of your leprosy." So Naaman goes, he's like, "This is crazy. Like, I've got the
How
river
dare
of
he?
Damascus. I've got these beautiful, great
Yes.
rivers, and you want me to go down to this lowly, little, dirty river Jordan, and that's where I'm supposed to wash to be clean, and I have to do it 7 times? Like, what? This is crazy." And so as he's kind of going away complaining about this, again, it's a servant, right? Like a servant steps in and says, "You know what, Naaman, if he'd have come out, if the prophet would have come out and he'd have told you to do some great thing, you'd have done it, right?" And how often in our lives, in our business, it's like, okay, if you just tell me to go and dig this giant pit in my backyard and I'll find a treasure chest and that's how I'm going to make my million. Like, there we go, right? Like, I'll do it. I'll grab the shovel today. Let's go, right? Like, but it's the little things, right? Like, here we have 3 servants involved in this situation. And then it's okay, not go to the great river, not do this, like lead this army to this great battle and you'll be healed. Like, no, it's go down to this lowly little river and get in and wash 7 times. So you've got to repeat this. You're not going to be healed on the 6th time, right? Like, I don't know how it worked, right? Did it come off a little bit after the first and was like, oh, this might be working? We don't know that, right? Or was it just immediately after the 7th time it was like, whoa, okay, now I'm healed, right? Like, we don't know exactly how that story played out. Was it a week after the 7th time? Like, we don't exactly know. But we know that it required a complete 7 times of washing to be healed. We know that it was the advice of 3 seemingly lowly servants that got him to do this, right? This great leader, this one of great authority. And how persistent are we in business? Like, are we willing to do the 1%? Like, how persistent are we in our families, right? Like, if our relationship is struggling with our spouse, are we willing to change ourselves 1% every day? Um, like, are we willing to show them more gratitude every day, even though we may not feel like we're grateful? Are we willing, like, how are we going to affect the relationship with our children, right? Like,
Yeah.
they may not be fond of us. Are we going to step up and take them out to lunch? Are we going to do the little things? Like, what are the things that we're doing to increase our spirituality, to increase our motivation, to be able to have more I am statements, to change our mindset, right? Like, it's not some great thing that's going to make this shift. It's the 1% every day, right? Like it's making these minor adjustments, right? Like you talk about the Feller's wedge, and okay, the devil can use this with discouragement, but it's also the Feller's wedge in accomplishing a lot of the goals in our own lives, right?
Absolutely.
Like use it the opposite is true, right? Like it requires minute adjustments. I know you talk about like high performing executives that are these Ferraris, right? Like minor adjustments. I believe that's the case with every human, right? Like we are all high performing Ferraris. And what we put into ourselves, what we put into our effort determines what the output's going to be. And most times it requires just some small thing to make that adjustment.
Yeah, 100%.
So why, as we look at kind of investing in ourselves, right? Like you're a coach for profession, right? People pay you to come in and tell them the 1% things that they need to do, right? Or advise them or direct them, right? But that's your profession, right?
That's
But
right.
there's a lot of people that struggle. Like we'll invest in nice homes, we'll invest in nice cars, we'll invest in bigger TV, right? Like we're recording this just after Black Friday, right? Like, how many of us went out and invested in lots of new things because they were 30%, 40%, 50% off, right? Like, I was reading the other day that this Black Friday set a new record. Like, we're setting records every year on Black Friday. And apparently, we all have this discretionary income to go spend on things. But how much are we investing in ourselves? And why do you think that people struggle so much to invest money and time on themselves when they can do it on such meaningless things?
It's comes back to the whole dopamine like addict that we are as a human race. And I think we've gotten more and more focused on dopamine, that when you look at the story of Facebook, Instagram, like TikTok, they literally brought in psychologists to figure out how to give dopamine hits. And the like button, actually, I don't know if you've ever watched I think it was a Netflix documentary, but they interviewed the original founders, the people that were working on the like button. And they said the like button was the worst invention that they made because they had no idea how powerful it was going to be. And he said in the beginning, we were so excited because it worked. And oh man, did it work. But then they started having girls commit suicide because they weren't getting enough likes on their post. And that's when they realized the danger of what they had created in this dopamine junkie world. And now we stick iPads and iPhones in front of our little kids and start giving them way too much world to deal with at their young little mind age. That's a whole nother podcast episode for another time. But man, we have become really addicted to these microdoses of dopamine. And if we're not getting them, we suddenly start to lean into discouragement. And that's really sad. We have to figure out how to become our own champion and to find within the work that we're doing, again, going back to that why. You were talking about like the trip to the East Coast. And even though things changed and didn't turn out how you wanted it, the why was to spend good time with the family, to create memories. And so who cares if we go to Mall of America or Boston, Massachusetts, or drive out to the Oregon coast? It's about the experience. That's the why that drives us to say, okay, we'll shift, and that's fine. And in business, if you have a why of what you're trying to accomplish, or in your own life, whether it's business or not, if you've got this reason that you're trying to accomplish the goals that you're setting out to accomplish, when the game changes, you lean on the why, not the destination, not the outcome. But you go back and say, but why did we start down this journey? So let's do that, even though what we thought was going to be the outcome has changed. That'll pull you through it. And that becomes your own driver for the microdoses of dopamine that you need to get through the day.
So, what are some things that you would advise people to do to hit those microdoses? What are some ways that we can invest in ourselves?
Oh, man. First and foremost, start working out. Like the especially for the men listening, like get to the gym. Women need it as well. There's all sorts of studies on what the outcomes and the hits of dopamine you get from working out. But I think for men also that it'll up your testosterone, which helps you process the dopamine in a healthier way. And it really gives you a lot of mental stability. So that's number one. I think that garbage in, garbage out. I think it's important that we eat well. I've been looking a lot into stem cells recently, and the power, although they are expensive, but if you have the means, the outcomes are absolutely astronomical. So there's a lot of different things that you can start to do to biohack yourself to have more dopamine, to feel better. I think having goals that are clear and succinct, as we've discussed a little bit here on the podcast, finding your why, what is it that drives you towards what you want to have be your outcomes. I think all of those are steps that will help you microdose joy into your life. The other thing that I'll mention, my wife, she's absolutely incredible. And she's dealt with a lot of women who she used to run chat books. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they've got a great little app, and they're very well known for their customer service. And my wife ran their customer support team for 8 years and built this incredible team of women who she would say that she would teach them, you have to choose joy. So while life is going to happen, hard things are going to come, choose to focus on gratitude and joy, even in the moments when it's hard. Because as we make that decision, that conscious decision to focus on joy, it helps us find courage to not be discouraged. And I think that's really important. Yeah, it's kind of full circle there, isn't it?
No, I love it. Joy and gratitude tend to go hand in hand, right? Like, and just being grateful and finding that level of gratitude, finding that level of appreciation for where we are, the situation that we're in, the life that we're experiencing, the things that we have, right? Like we live in this world of abundance. And I think sometimes, especially for those that get stuck in, maybe they're not making the money, or they're not earning the salary that they want to, they're not feeling physically fit like they want to, they're struggling with whatever it might be, right? Or they've just lost a loved one, or they're struggling with some physical ailment, whether it be cancer or some other loss, right? Like um those are hard moments, right? Like those are discouraging moments, and it's sometimes hard to find gratitude in those moments. And I think like trying to find gratitude in those moments is so crucial. It's so important. One of my daily practices is like I've taken the 5 minute journal framework. And it's, if you look up the 5 minute journal, right, like it's really just, okay, what do I want to accomplish? What are the three things that I really want to accomplish today? What are three things I'm grateful for? And like what defines my day, right? Like what am I trying to be today? And it's really just kind of going through these few little questions, taking 5 minutes to really ponder on this. But gratitude is such a big part of that, right? And I sit here in my office that overlooks Utah Lake, and it's beautiful. I love to look out as the sun kisses the west mountain over here. It's pretty easy to be grateful for the beauty, the nature, right? The creations. But sometimes when things are going rough, the days are hard, right? Like it's a little tougher to be grateful. Maybe it's really cold outside and I would rather be where it's 80 degrees. But it's finding that gratitude, right? And expressing that. And I think that's so important. I love that little lesson from your wife and how powerful that is to find the joy. I love what Brendan Burchard talks about. He says one of his things is to bring the joy, and I think that's just upping it another level, right? Like not only am I going to find joy, but I'm going to be the one bringing the joy. I'm going to bring the joy to the party. I'm going to bring the joy to my family. I'm going to bring the joy to this experience. And it's hard. It's not always easy, right? Like
Not always easy. No.
life is tough, but the more that we express gratitude, the more that we show it. And it's nice. It's good to write it down, right? Journal about it, express it, right? offer gratitude in your prayers, in your meditation, in your mindful practice, right? But it's so important to express gratitude to those that are around us. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Let me add also one thing that I've noticed. If you're struggling with feeling depression, feeling discouraged, feeling like life isn't going the way that it is, it's typically what I've discovered is that it resides around unmet, what's the right word? Unmet desires or not doing things that you know you should be doing. When life starts to slow down, if you'll take an inventory, if you'll step back and just say, what am I not doing that I should be doing? Think about in
yeah.
sales. It's like, oh, my sales job sucks. I'm not making the money. I'm so frustrated. I'm feeling discouraged. Odds are you're probably not hitting enough prospects. You're probably slowing down on the day to day steps that you need to be taking in order to generate enough leads or interest or outreach to actually accomplish that goal. You think about family. You just feel like, oh, my family, we're not connecting. We're not. Well, how much outreach are you doing? How many steps are you taking to do that? Or are you waiting for somebody else to do it and feeling discouraged because it's not happening? And so, like what you're saying with Brennan Burchard, of he brings the joy, bring the success, you need to be the one out there making it happen. And if you're feeling those feelings of it's not happening, then assess yourself. What are you not doing? Where are you failing to step it up? And I want to just acknowledge that I know when depression is present, that is very hard. But this hard reality of depression is that no one's coming to save you. You have to crawl out of that abyss that you might be feeling you're stuck in by reversing back through and acknowledging the good that is in you, that realizing that you have things to contribute to the world and that the world is waiting for you to show up, just like you're waiting for somebody else to show up for them. Or sorry, you're waiting for somebody to show up for you. Others are waiting for you to show up for them.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, right? Because one of the greatest ways, at least in my experience and from what I've read and seen, to overcome depression, discouragement, some of the right, is go and serve somebody else, right? Go reach out to somebody else. Find a way to lift and help somebody else today, right? Look for those opportunities to serve. And so often, right, like you point this out, but so often it just comes down to one thing. Like if I'm struggling, you bring up the sales example, right? Like if I'm struggling to make quota, well, what is the one thing that is keeping me from making quota, right? Like, okay, my funnel may be empty because I'm not bringing in new leads, right? Like, are you waiting for somebody to just hand you a bucket of leads? That's not typically going to happen. And or in your relationship with your spouse, right? Like it may just be a weekly date night, right? Like, are you having your weekly date night? It may just be that one thing, right? Like she may be just sitting there like, is does he care about me? Does he want to spend time with me, right? Like, are you making the effort for that weekly date night? With your kids, right? Like, are you intentional, right? Like, are you making time for them? They don't care how much money you make. They don't care what car you drive. They don't care. They might, when they get teenagers, they might kind of care what house they live in. But they, like, at the end of the day, they don't care about most of it if mom or dad is present, right? Like, are they there? Are they committed to spending time with me, right? Like last night, I'm flipping a house right now, and had to be out of the house a little late yesterday, and I texted my 16-year-old. I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna grab some pizza on my way home." My wife was working last night, so she was not home, and said, "Let's do a pizza movie night." And of course, her fire back is like, as long as I can be in bed by 8, Dad. I don't know many 16-year-olds that have an 8 o'clock bedtime, but
Yeah,
mine
that's
does.
awesome.
She is committed to, yeah, she is committed to her routine, her schedule. I look up to her from that standpoint. She's great. But it was about the time, right? Like I wanted to spend time with my girls. I know that Two of them were going to be home. The third might get home. She did. She spent a few minutes with us until she's 21, so she went off and did her schoolwork and stuff. But it was great to have that time to, okay, yeah, we may not be communicating, but at least like, okay, dad's present, we're here, right? Like we're spending time together. I've been very intentional about our family time, and we've taken our kids on lots of trips. They've been to all 50 states, and we love to just travel. We don't get to do it as much because they're busy with their activities, and my son's in the Philippines for the next year and a half plus. But yeah, it's so important to make that effort, to be intentional about it, right? And I think intentionality around our desires is crucial. It's so important that we show up. But again, it usually just takes one thing, right? Like, and it's looking at, okay, I love the book The One Thing, written by Jay Papasan and Gary Keller. Gary Keller is the founder of Keller Williams, but in that book, right, what is the one thing that I can do to make all the other things easier or unnecessary? And it's such a big question that comes down to a very simple answer. And if we can answer that simply and we can go out and we can do that, a lot of the stuff just falls away and it
Yeah.
becomes less important, right? And like, how often do I show up at work and the first thing that I do is I open my email inbox? And I think we can all answer me, right? Like, but then how long do you spend in that email inbox, right? Like, you may look up and you're like, oh crap, it's almost lunchtime. Where'd my morning go? Well, it got lost in other people's problems because you were too busy in your email. And I love the statement, make before you manage. And like the morning for me specifically is important, right? Like it's sacred time. I usually block out my mornings until at least 10 a.m. And that's when I create. That's when I write. That's when I put together my questions, my stuff for podcast episodes. That's when I edit photography. Like that's when I do the creative things because my brain is fresh, it's energized, right? Like usually I've just gone on a run or I've worked out and like the synapses, they're all firing, right? Once it hits one or two, I'm toast, right? Like just give
Getting
me
tired.
give me administrative tasks at that point that I don't have to think about, right? That and then it's management, right? Like okay, whenever I'm working with companies, I'm always pushing for afternoon meetings. Like I want our meetings in the afternoon because I don't want to waste people's precious time in the morning. Because the afternoon, you're going to accomplish enough in a meeting in the afternoon as you would in the morning. Like don't waste your morning. Don't waste your most high productive moments sitting in a meeting together. If it's a brainstorm or it's a goal setting session or something like that, okay, that might be different. But if it's a weekly, like, okay, let's go over the analytics, let's go over the data, let's go over the numbers, right? Like, let, how are people doing? How's staff? Like, that stuff can all be done in the afternoon. So make
Yeah.
before you manage.
Reticular activating stuff that it's just not going to remember anyway. It's going to filter it all out.
Yep. So I think it's so important to be intentional and
Totally.
to lean into intentionality, right? And being intentional with our schedule, right? Like so talk to us a little bit about and then we'll wrap with a series of rapid fire questions. But how are you intentional around your schedule each day?
Well, I have a routine, and I think that that's probably the most important for any of your listeners that are thinking like, how do I change this? Here comes the new year. You know, this will drop just a little bit after the new year, but man, we follow a couple. So I have a morning routine and an evening routine because I know I've dropped Zig a couple times, but another thing that he taught me was that your morning starts the night before. And so if you're trying to get to the gym, think about how hard it is to get up, pick out your workout outfit, get your things together. Do I have my toiletries, my towel, like if you shower at the gym or whatever? Do I have everything ready to go? But if you have your bag ready the night before and it's sitting by the door and you lay out your outfit that you're going to wear, all you got to do is like wake up, take your pre if you use that, and pick up your bag and go. Like boom, you're out the door. And it makes it so much easier to accomplish your task, to accomplish your commitment to yourself because you've started those things. And so let me just really quick, I'll pull up the structure I follow. It's pretty cool. So in the morning, you want to cover your bases. And you've all heard Hal Elrod, Miracle Morning. He has I can't remember what his acronym is, but this is kind of similar in that I go through my bases and the BASES. So blessings, affirmations, silence, which is my meditation time, exercise, and study. So every morning I go through my gratitude, I'll say my prayers, I'll go through all of those steps in the blessings. I reflect on my blessings and I ask for additional blessings I need. Then I go through my affirmations. I have a whole list of them, have them memorized. I go through them every morning, and I have a visualization that I do where I can see my life the way that I want to, and not only see it, but feel it. I know what it feels like to be inside of that life. And then my silence, I do some meditation. I do some breath work in the morning, just a brief. For me, it's usually about 5 minutes. Then I go to the gym. I hit the gym every morning about 5:45, and I take my 12-year-old son with me. He goes and works out with me, and then we're home. And on our drive, usually we'll listen like to some scripture or something like that. But on the way back, we'll flip on an audiobook. And you guys want a good recommendation for an audiobook? Steve Houghton just released a brand new one. It's called Rich Routines by Steve Houghton. Very, very good. You want a good structure for routines for your family, for success. This guy is a rock star, a mentor of mine that I love. And just, yeah, check out that book. You won't regret it. But going back, in the evening, we pave the way for tomorrow. And PAVE is your acronym for the evenings. In the evenings, I make sure I pray, I do my affirmations, I visualize tomorrow, what is it going to look like? And then I encode. And encode is a process where we take the negative things that happened, and we rewrite them how we wish they would have happened. So if you had something go bad in the day, let's just say it was like, you got reprimanded by a boss or something, you would go back and re-encode that. It's the very last step. It's as I'm laying there and I'm replaying my day, what I wish would have gone better. I encode it as I would have had it play out, and then I go to sleep, and my subconscious mind works on that. And what that does is it creates this new storyline as if your day had gone really well. And you wake up the next day feeling pumped and energized and ready to crush it. It's kind of a cool process.
Love it. That's awesome. So, do you time block out your day? So, in between your bases and your pave, do you
I'm
usually time
huge
block
about
it out, or?
Absolutely. Yes. I time block by 2-hour blocks. So lunch is, noon to 2. Then I've got a block of work from 2 to 4. I try to be done with my work because I know that last hour, maybe hour and a half, is going to require all the fixing of the day. But my morning, usually I'm like you, I'm blocked out till 10 a.m., sometimes 10:30 a.m. And I'll have if somebody wants to meet earlier, do coaching, things like that, I fill those blanks in. And then I try to keep my Friday completely unblocked. Well, let me rephrase that. I keep my Friday completely blocked off so that I can finish up whatever the week needed and finish strong and get into my weekend early. I value my free time. I think the thing that we have that's the most valuable is our time and what we choose to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So when are you setting, so those blocks are kind of routine regularly, but are you filling those in typically the night before with, okay, these are maybe the to-dos or the events within those blocks if they aren't already filled in, or?
Yeah, I usually take Sundays to do kind of an assessment of my week, look at what's coming, look at what needs to happen. I fill in events. I go to a lot of networking events, and just looking for the right opportunities to connect with the right people. And so I'll take a little bit of time Sunday just to, really assess what the week is going to look like. And it's intentional. I try to be very intentional about what I want my outcomes to be and get the things that I need to be done or need to have done checked off through the week.
Intentionality is so important. as we've
Yeah.
already mentioned, right? Like it's so good.
Intentional living, man. That's what it's all
So,
about.
okay, well, I've got a series of rapid fire questions, so we can roll through these as fast or as slow as you want. I'll
Have
fire them
at it.
off and I'll let
Yeah.
you answer them how you want. What is one of your greatest accomplishments?
Greatest accomplishments. Gosh, I would have to say the greatest accomplishment in my life is raising the family that I have. I have incredible connections with all of my kids. I've been very intentional about that. I've taken time for daddy-daughter dates with my daughters. My son is just 12, and so we're starting that process of going out. You know, that's one of the reasons he goes to the gym, is so that we get personal one-on-one time. And it's hard. I will acknowledge how hard that is to squeeze in. But guys, especially you dads, your presence in the life of your children is far more quintessential than you can even imagine. So, yes, it's hard, but I can guarantee it's the best investment you'll ever make.
What frightens you?
What frightens me? I think the thing that frightens me the most is the decline of morality in society. I feel like if good men don't stand up and raise their voices, we're going to lose the incredible world and democracy that we have here in America. And I think that's going to leave our kids holding a bag that we never imagined America could become. So yeah, the moral decline and the unintentionality just rolling with life, that terrifies me.
Yeah. What inspires you?
I'd say the good men standing up and raising their voices and fighting and not letting it just roll over and say, oh, what, it is what it is. So I'm inspired by men who, like, truly, men and women both, who have a moral compass and are intentional and like stand up and say, this is the hill I'm going to die on. This is my standard and I will not be moved. I'm so inspired by that. I love.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as it's the right hill to die on. But
True.
I think there's a lot of flag planting on the wrong hill. But I agree. Those that plant their flag on the right hill is inspiring for sure. What gives you hope for the future?
As I look at the future, I teach my clients, there's a phrase that we use, and I teach them to repeat this over and over as an affirmation in their own lives. And I say it this way for my own life: things just work out for Brad Brockbank. Even when they're not, just give it a minute. They always work out. And as I look back on my life, on the hard times, the times when things got so difficult and there was no money, there was no hope, there was nobody coming on a white horse, there was no investment that might come through, things somehow, some way still worked out. I'm still here. I'm still kicking. I'm still moving forward. That gives me hope for the future. And what I've decided is, instead of looking at all the failures and saying, well, this didn't work out or this didn't happen, I look at the other side of things, that even though life hasn't always turned out the way I wanted it to, some way, somehow, life has always worked out. And so that gives me hope that things are going to continue to work out in the future.
Yep. Awesome. What's something you would want to tell your 18-year-old self?
Invest in Bitcoin. No, if I could go back.
All right, Biff.
Yeah. No, I think if I could go back, it would be to be believing, to just trust. Going back to what I just said, things will work out. Just hang in there, keep going, don't give up. And when it gets hard, keep pushing.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Keep pushing, keep driving. Like, yeah, you get stuck out in the middle of the lake and don't give up. You'll drown, right? Like,
that's right.
Just keep going. You'll make it to the other side. What book are you reading right now?
Well, like I said, the Steve Houghton's book that I'm just finishing. I'm actually in the last, I think, 10 minutes of it right now on the audiobook. So, Rich Routines. I can't recommend it enough. I'm at the end of the book. I've been so inspired listening to it. It's read by the author if you do the Audible version of it. And he is truly just one of, as you listen to it, at certain points in the book, if you didn't know him, you might be like, is this guy for real? Like, is life that good? Has that really happened? And I can attest to it. I knew Steve. We lived in Dallas, Fort Worth for about 4 years. And I was the assistant scoutmaster to the troop that he was the scoutmaster of. And he really is, like, the routines that he talks about and the outcomes that he's had because of them are legit, straight up. He lives it. He he's been intentional. Man, you want a book on intentionality? This is the book.
Awesome. I think routine, as we've talked about, right? Like routine is so important because once we get into a routine, once we've established habits, we don't have to use the brain power to do it, right? Like it
100%.
just is, right? Like, and so that frees up our brain power. It's the reason why Steve Jobs wore a black shirt every single day, right? Like he wore the same shirt, not the
That's right.
same actual shirt, but the same, like his
Yes,
closet was the same black shirt, right? Like, and the
that's it.
same slacks, right? Like that's what he wore because he did not want to burn a decision on what he got dressed in every day. And so you look at a lot of meal preppers that like to prepare their meals throughout the week. That's not me. My palate's way better. I can't do broccoli and chicken every day. I have a business partner that is like that, and I give him a hard time about it all the time.
That's
But
awesome.
but the routines are so important, right? Because it takes decision off our plate so that we can save those decisions. We can just save that cognitive ability for other things, and I think that's
Yes.
important. So
Yep. 100%.
yeah, so I think establishing those routines is crucial. What book have you read in the past 12 to 18 months that you would highly recommend to others?
And pull up my Audible. I read so many books. I will tell you my top book. I don't think I've read it in the last 18 months, but it's gosh, now I'm going to blank on it. Into the Magic Shop. So, Into the Magic Shop, it talks a lot about the neural pathways, like the whole, like it gets into the science of almost The Secret. Not that I'm a huge proponent of The Secret, but I do believe that The Secret contained certain whispers of truth. It just was presented in a maybe a more ethereal manner. And I love this because it's actually a story. It's the first, I'm not big on stories. I like to read more of the text and like get into the science and like really understand what's happening in the brain and things like that. But this book had me captivated. I could not put it down. Let me find the name of the guy who wrote it.
And we can throw it in the show notes too.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe we do that
the
because
mag the
I don't
magic the
know.
magic shop. Okay,
Into the Magic Shop.
into the magic shop. Okay,
Yeah,
and
it's
so it
awesome
sounds
book.
sounds like you're an Audible guy. Do you also read paper books, or is it strictly Audible?
My ADD makes it really hard to sit down and read a book. A book to me, when I start reading it, is like kryptonite to staying awake. It like just puts me to sleep. So I can listen to audiobooks. The interesting thing is if I listen to an audiobook while I drive, I can drive all night. I can't put it down. But if I try to look at a paper book, I really struggle. But I do love having paper books in certain books that I read because I can go back and take notes. And recently, I've just started having ChatGPT do a lot of like book summaries for me, so I can go back and be like, "Oh yeah, those are," and I transfer those really the points that like move me, that change me. I'll write them down in my. I have this book that I carry with me that has all my profound thoughts and quotes and things like that that have been impactful in my life.
Awesome. So I do audiobooks, but this past year, my book count of consumption has decreased quite a bit because I have committed to do more paper books.
Wow.
And I have a pretty extensive library that I'm looking at here in my office right now. But I think my wife's gonna get tired of me doing this podcast because everybody recommends good books, and then I end up going and buy them off of thrift books. And so like I've literally got a stack of books on the floor down here that are all books that I've bought from thrift books. And my wife's like, you probably don't even know what's in those packages anymore. So I'm just going to wrap them for Christmas and give them to you for Christmas. So they will probably disappear from here pretty soon and
That's
end up
awesome.
under the Christmas tree. But
Nothing
so,
wrong with that.
but I
That's
do, I
good.
do love, I do love audiobooks. I've just been doing more podcasts. I do audiobooks when I'm running or when I'm hiking, or I can't do audiobooks as well when I'm driving unless I'm going on a long drive. Like I drove down to St. George last weekend, and on my way home, I listened to the entire book of The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, which was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Highly recommend that one. but I need to go listen to it again already because it was so good. And it's like, okay, I got to go crack that one open again. But so if they're longer drives, if I know I'm going to be driving longer than an hour and a half, then it's like, okay, now I can pop in an audiobook. But I just don't like the start and stop if I'm just commute driving, right? Like,
Yeah.
so that's tough for me. But awesome. Okay, what is your favorite place you've traveled in the past and why? And this is kind of a loaded question because I know you've lived in like 30 different places.
We have.
So it could be a place you've lived, but whether it's lived or traveled, what's your favorite place and why?
I'll answer both. Lived, we loved Dallas, honestly. Um,
Really
yeah, I loved Dallas.
fascinating.
And the reason it was such a unique place because I don't think you find anywhere else in the United States that has such an open, like kind people. I pulled into Dallas. I took a job down there with a company. It was a very high-end men's custom clothing like clothier. I wasn't about to call my colleagues and be like, "Hey, come help me unload my U-Haul." So I had the biggest U-Haul loaded to the hilt. There was hardly a space of air in that thing. And I had to unload it all by myself. I didn't know anybody in my church down there. I didn't know anybody to call. We were like pulling up, had found this apartment, rented it online, sight unseen, and I started unloading. And within a matter of like 10 minutes, I had like 7 Texans just like, "Hey, saw you had a U-Haul. You need help?" And I'm like, I mean, it's a big U-Haul. And they're like, "I got some time today." And they like literally just helped me unload. And that was our experience for the 4 years we lived there, just over and over. Good people showing up. They didn't care what race you were, they didn't care what religion you were, they didn't care that you weren't born in Texas. They were just glad you were there. And it was a cool experience. It also, we never got over, when you go to somewhere tropical, you like walk outside and you can like feel that you're on vacation. it
Yeah.
felt it felt like that to me the entire time we lived there. I never got used to it. I never got over it. Maybe that was because I grew up in Vancouver, Washington, where it rains 9 months out of the year. But man, it was just cool. We just loved our experience there. Travel wise, anywhere in the Caribbean. Man, I love the Caribbean. Like all
That's
the
beautiful.
islands, the people are just amazing. And of course, just being out there swimming in the ocean, I think is just one of my favorite places to be. It's kind of my happy place.
That's awesome. I do enjoy the Caribbean and need to get back out there. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's
We
beautiful.
should go together. We'll plan a trip.
So great. I'm game. Let's do it. So yeah, Dallas would not have been on my short list, that's for
Oh,
sure.
dude.
I have
It
never
was
lived
cool.
there, so I like living in a place is very different than visiting a place, right? Like
Very much.
it's very different to go and get assimilated with the people and the culture and all of the experience, right? Like there is a lot of difference. And for you, I bet you got stories like crazy with the different places you've lived.
We
But
do.
just traveling to Dallas, it was not like it's fine, but it's a big city on a big flat piece of land.
Yes. Yeah. There's definitely,
So,
I got to see some of the, it's kind of like going to, like, if you were to come over to my house, the house would be nice and beautiful and cleaned up, and we'd show you all the cool things. But if you live here, you start to find all the little treasures and gems, and also you see the dirty and all the little places we've stashed things. And like, you just get a different experience when it's like you're actually living in that place or being in that place all the time.
for sure. Yeah. So where can people keep up with you or follow you, Brad?
Definitely on all the socials. If you look up, just search Brad Brockbank, look for the handsome bald guy. You can also find me at the uofu.org. So that's the letter U of YOU.org is my website. And yeah, LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn. That's my most active platform. I find that if I spend too much time on the other socials, I get sucked into the algorithm. So I limit myself because I want to be productive. I want to do things, and LinkedIn doesn't suck me in as deeply. So connect with me
Yeah.
there. Always
And
welcome to reach out.
we'll probably get him going on Substack here by the time this thing releases. So if I can get
That
him
sounds good.
convinced, but
I'm down.
we'll drop that in the show notes if that's existing. I love the business you've created, U of U, University of You. as in you yourself, right? Like so much of what we do is investing in things. We need to kind of turn and invest in ourselves. We have so much inside of ourselves that we are just not fulfilling as individuals. We could dive into so much of that more and spend another hour and a half on just talking about that. But we've covered a lot today. Hopefully this has been enjoyable to all of you. Brad, thank you so much for joining us. We
Man, thanks for
appreciate the
having
time
me.
you've taken. And we invite you to check out Brad's business, his coaching business. If it fits for you, great. If not, just consume the content. Brad produces some really good content. Hopefully, by the time this drops, he'll be podcasting again. So we'll work on some stuff, but I'm excited for what Brad's got cooking and what he's got coming. You'll see great things from Brad. And again, I appreciate the time. Thanks to all of you for joining us on A Bit of Curiosity. Please like, follow, subscribe, share this with somebody that you think could benefit from this. We all have high performers locked inside of ourselves. Determine what success is for yourself and go out and get it. So thanks again. Appreciate it.